I'm Patrick Allen, Politico. It is now time to turn the table with CNN's Candy Crowley. Candy, some big news at the end of this week. Obviously, the Senate, pretty historic vote on how they're going to change the rules for filibustering the president's nominees, and the president spoke about it himself. What is sort of the 30,000-foot view on how this is going to change how business gets done here in Washington?
I think three things are pretty evident from this vote. Number one, the atmospherics are only going to get worse. The reason this is called the nuclear option is not even because for the first time in a generation they're doing this, and it's been argued over many presidencies, but because it is sure to make the atmosphere more toxic than it already is. Second of all, it kind of brings out what those who follow the judiciary know, which is the weight of these courts, whether they swing right or they swing left, is the cause of fierce battles during these sometimes little-known nomination fights. Because they get filibustered, they tend to not get a whole lot of play, but the truth is a lot of politics goes on in the nominations and in the confirmation. I think the third thing is it's election season, and as frustrated as the Democrats are, and as justified as they may feel they are in doing this, it is clearly true from the president's remarks post the decision to change the rules, and from those remarks made on the floor by Democrats, that there are two main messages coming out for election season. The first from the Republicans is Obamacare is a disaster. Need we say more? Big government doesn't work. These are big government people. Vote for Republicans. But the Democrats' message is they block everything. These Republicans are obstructionists. And this was one big old up-to-bat kind of home run they wanted to make. And they did it. So we will see how that plays. I think it's interesting, Patrick, that although people are very upset with Congress for not getting the work done, and although we have seen in recent polls that they blame Republicans for that, generally they're talking about pieces of legislation. They're not talking about circuit court nominees. So this doesn't clear the sort of the legislative part of gridlock, and that's what most people see when they talk about gridlock. So it'll be interesting to see if this plays out at all in the public, but it certainly is a huge, huge election issue for Democrats.
You know, you mentioned Obamacare. The administration has been doing its best to sort of save face on what's been a pretty bad rollout, to say the least. We learned a little bit this week that despite the administration's assurances that it still remains a workable program, there was an embarrassing moment for Kathleen Sebelius where the website right in front of her wasn't working. We're learning more and more about who knew what when about just how ready this website would or would not be. What is sort of your report card on where things stand with that, at least just from a political standpoint, on whether or not the administration has done a good job of reassuring Americans that, in fact, this program is something that is worth your time sitting at your laptop on?
I certainly don't think thus far, as of getting toward late November, the administration has done a good job at all about reassuring people. Here's the biggest reassurance. Here's how the administration can turn this thing around. It can start to work. People can start, because their whole thing is, wait, once we can get this website up and people start to see what a great deal this is, they're going to love it. We'll see, because that would certainly turn things around. So talk to me in June, but at the moment they haven't done it. And what we're seeing now, anecdotally, and I don't think anybody has that 30,000-foot view of how Obamacare will play out, is that there are lots of unintended consequences going on here, that people are not all that thrilled with what they think they've seen. But I don't think you can say whether the Obama administration has reassured anybody until we get into the actual Obamacare part of it on January 1. And then a lot depends on whether Americans look at this and say, yeah, you know what, this was okay. But so far, we certainly haven't seen much sign of that in terms of Democratic reassurance.
Well, but a slightly different topic on the day that our interview runs, Friday, November 22nd. That'll be the 50th anniversary of JFK's assassination. Tell us a little bit. There's obviously a lot of people talking about what that moment meant, the confusion, the conspiracies. In terms of looking at the arc of the 20th century, what it meant for that time and for obviously the subsequent years and decades that follow, how did it change the American narrative?
Well, it was the beginning, wasn't it, in a lot of ways of a really tumultuous time. I was in school at the time, and I just recall as we kind of moved through the 60s, and you had Martin Luther King, and you had the Bobby Kennedy assassination, it all kind of seemed to start with the JFK assassination. And although America certainly didn't know it at the time, there was a point, certainly at the height of the Vietnam War, when there were protests on the street, and Kent State killings by from the National Guard to students at Kent State, seemed like the JFK assassination, when you look backwards, was the beginning of when, if you were a kid at the time, the world started to be on fire. It started such a tumultuous. I mean, are they connected? Probably not. But I think in the mind, as you watch that arc of history, it was a terrifying, scary time, I think, for a lot of people. And it began in that day 50 years ago and kind of continued through the 60s into the 70s.
All right, Candy Crowley, CNN, thanks a lot for joining us.
Thanks.